Hey guys, what's up? Sean here, another video. So, I'm a huge jazz guy. I have about 1,000 jazz LPs. And ever since the vinyl resurgence, the market for used jazz, especially 50s and 60s from labels like Blue Note and Prestige and Riverside and Impulse and the big New York labels and others as well have just gone insane. And that's just been exacerbated by the pandemic. You know, jazz records that were going for $20, $30 in 2018, 2019 are now going for 100. You know, records that were going for $300, $400 before the pandemic are now $800, $900 records. It's unbelievable, and a lot of it is driven by trophy collectors, right? People who don't necessarily care about the music, they just want rare jazz records to have them, right? They're trophies to them. And that's not me. I am far more of a historian. I just like to have that original document, especially with jazz LPs, because they're such a cool part of American music history. I mean, jazz is one of the only musical art forms that is uniquely, truly American. And so when it comes to these old jazz records, I want to hear the original cuts, right? I want to hear the same record that people heard in the 50s. I don't want to hear a modern mastering engineer and his modern mastering chain's interpretation of a 60 or 70-year-old record, right? It's just not me. I'm a history person like that. And so this is going to be the first part of a multi-part series on some of the rarest jazz records that I own. And I'm going to have to do this in segments because, as I said, I have almost 1,000 jazz LPs. So I'm going to break this up by individual record label. And, generally I don't get involved in this collector stuff. As I said, I'm a historian, not a trophy collector. However, people like seeing really rare and valuable stuff. So sure, I'll play along. Why not? So today, I'm going to start this series, not with Blue Note, which will probably bum some of you guys out, but that's okay. We'll get there. But I'm going to start with Prestige. Prestige was a jazz label formed in New York City in 1949 by a guy named Bob Weinstock. And Bob Weinstock was a bit of a shyster. There's no way around that. When it came to screwing over his artists and everything else, I mean, Bob Weinstock was a master. I'll just say it. But that being said, it doesn't change the fact that Prestige released some of the greatest recordings in the history of jazz. They just did. So, I try and separate the business aspect of Prestige from the actual art that was created. And so, Prestige had some of the biggest name artists of the day. They were John Coltrane's original label. Sonny Rollins, John Wright, Art Taylor, Donald Byrd, Kenny Burrell. I mean, just so many amazing jazz musicians recorded for Prestige. Thelonious Monk. And so I'm going to show some of the original pressings of old Prestige classics that I have. And I'm going to do this in two phases. The first one is going to be the main Prestige label. And then Prestige also had a couple of sub-labels like New Jazz and Moodsville and Swingsville. I'm not doing any of the Ville labels, but I am going to show a few things from New Jazz because I'm pretty much convinced at this point that everything that ever came out on New Jazz was absolutely fantastic. I've never heard a record on New Jazz that I didn't enjoy. So I'll go ahead and get started here. The first one is this. It is Prestige 7190. This is Southside Soul by John Wright. This one is a bit of a sleeper that people have just started discovering recently, and the price on this one keeps creeping up and up and up. But this album is just insane. It's a piano trio record, so it's got John Wright on piano, Wendell Roberts on bass, and Walter McCants on drums. And if you like, piano trios, they're not everybody's thing, but if you like just a nice, kind of moody vibe, this album has you covered. It's great. All right, next up, this might be the single greatest tenor saxophone album ever recorded. It has 4 of the best tenors of their era, certainly, probably of all time. So this is called Tenor Conclave. On tenor, you've got Hank Mobley, Al Cohn, Zoot Sims, and some bum named John Coltrane. I've heard that guy was pretty good. So it's 4 tenors on top of a rhythm section, of Red Garland on piano, Paul Chambers on bass, and Art Taylor on drums. I mean, I'm not sure there was more of a stalwart rhythm section than that in the late 50s. So, the rhythm section does a great job on this record of just providing a good platform, a good foundation for the tenors to just take off. And, each one of these guys have their own style. And it's, the whole gamut is kind of covered, right? So you got John Coltrane, who, had a more aggressive, loud, flamboyant style. And then you had Hank Mobley, who Leonard Feather, noted jazz critic, one time referred to as the middleweight champion of tenor sax, because and that was not an insult, that was actually a compliment. He was trying to say that Mobley's style was perfectly middle of the road. It was neither too aggressive nor too soft. So you got Mobley there in the middle, and Al Cohn as well. Al Cohn, I think, was very much solid in the middle, like a Hank Mobley or a Joe Henderson kind of thing. And then you have, on the smoother side, you've got Zoot Sims. And so when you listen to this, it's very easy to tell who's playing. And I can't recommend this record enough if you like tenor sax. It's amazing. Let's see. Okay, next. So this guy is more known as a producer for producing most of Miles Davis's Columbia albums, all of his legendary records. And here's an album that he did on Prestige in the 50s. Teo Macero with the Prestige Jazz Quartet. So this has Teo Macero on tenor and Teddy Charles on vibraphones. I personally love vibraphones in jazz. Not everyone's cup of tea, but I love them. It's got Mal Waldron on piano, who's an absolute legend. Addison Farmer on bass and Jerry Segal on drums. This is a nice slow cooker. Love it. All right, so getting into some guitar. This is a sleeper pick that not a lot are really familiar with, but if you love bluesy jazz guitar, this album cannot be beat. If you ever find this, pick it up. It's Bill Jennings, Enough Said. This is one of my favorite jazz guitar records of all time, even considering, some of the greats like Pat Metheny and Kenny Burrell and Grant Green. I would put this right up there with anything that any of those guys ever released. This Bill Jennings record is fantastic. In the 50s, soprano sax was not a huge thing in jazz. Soprano sax didn't really come to the forefront in jazz until the 70s and into the 80s, when that schlocky, smooth jazz kind of took over. Kenny G played a soprano sax. I can't believe I just spoke the name of the devil, but there you go. So soprano sax wasn't a big thing in the 50s. However, this guy Steve Lacy did a soprano sax album on Prestige, aptly titled Soprano Sax, Prestige 7125. And this is just a saxophone quartet, so it's Steve Lacy on soprano, with a rhythm section here. Let's see, Wynton Kelly on piano, Well Neidlinger on bass, and Dennis Charles on drums. So this is not smooth jazz style soprano sax. This is very much straight ahead jazz. It's just played at a slightly higher tone because it's soprano. So this is one of those that I would recommend streaming if you're a little bit iffy about it, because I think more people would like this than you would think. It's actually really great. All right, if Gene Ammon's name is on something, it's good. It's as simple as that. And here is a really nice original pressing of Gene Ammon's Blue Jean from 1958. This is just nice, bluesy, sentimental. Oh, so good. So this has Gene Ammons on tenor. Yeah, the entire horn line here is Gene Ammons on tenor, Idris Solomon on trumpet, and Pepper Adams on baritone. And then you've also got the rhythm section here. It's Mal Waldron on piano, Art Taylor on drums, Doug Watkins on bass, and Ray Barretto providing a little bit of conga to mix things up a little. So this is an all-time classic of the Prestige catalog. I would argue that no jazz library is complete without a copy of this. If you are into trumpets, this is a great trumpet record, aptly titled Three Trumpets. This is Donald Byrd and Art Farmer and Idris Solomon with Hod O'Brien on piano, Addison Farmer on bass, and Ed Thigpen on drums. The playing on this, I mean, Donald Byrd and Art Farmer especially brought their A game. Idris Solomon, his style is a little bit, I guess it's a little bit of an acquired taste. You know when it's him playing. But, I mean, Byrd and Farmer, oh my God, they sound so good on this album. They all brought their A game to this session. So, great record. This is one that has become a darling of the trophy collectors over the years. And this was recorded over a couple of different recording sessions. But this is Prestige 7117. It's called Taylor's Wailers. Art Taylor is the band leader on these. And let's see, so on various tracks here, depending on the session, you've got Donald Byrd on trumpet, Jackie McLean on alto, Charlie Rouse on tenor, either Ray Bryant or Red Garland on piano, either Wendell Marshall or Paul Chambers on bass. John Coltrane plays tenor on, I believe, 2 of these tracks. No, just 1. Okay, my bad. So anyway, this album is utterly fantastic, and it's not shocking that people really want this record because it's, as I said, it's outstanding. This is another one that I would consider an all-time classic of the Prestige catalog, no doubt. So there was another artist on Prestige in the 50s that kind of has been forgotten about, but man, this man put out some unbelievable records. His name was James Moody. And James Moody plays saxophone. He played tenor and alto, but I think mostly he played tenor. And I've got 2 of his records. Moody's Moods is really great, but I think this one is probably my favorite. It's just called Moody. And, James Moody's Prestige records can still be found for a fairly good price. For an original pressing of one of these will probably run you, I don't know, $50, which is fairly good price for Prestige originals. So, I would recommend picking these up if you like sax, because they're outstanding, and they're just not, people just aren't after them for whatever reason, but they're awesome. All right, so this is going to get me now to some albums where I'm going to show several by one artist. And I'm going to start with the saxophone colossus himself, Mr. Sonny Rollins, who, as of this moment, is, I believe, 91 years old. Still with us, thankfully. Man is a legend. This was his very first, I'm not sure if this was his very first bandleader album overall or just his first one for Prestige. I'd have to look that up, but here's an original pressing of Work Time. This is the one with the pink cover, as you can see. The later editions had a green cover. So this was one hell of a statement for Sonny Rollins. This record is absolutely timeless. No jazz library is complete without this. This record is important because it contains the one and only known recording of Sonny Rollins and John Coltrane playing together. It's called Tenor Madness. And as much as I hate to admit it, Sonny Rollins, John Coltrane is, in the upper echelons of sax players. So is Sonny Rollins. But man, Rollins burns Train on the title track. I mean, it's not even close. He absolutely took Train to the woodshed. But regardless, the title track is outstanding. And of course, that's the historically important one. But every track on this record is top shelf. It's got Sonny Rollins on tenor, Philly Joe Jones on drums, Red Garland on piano, Paul Chambers on bass. So basically it's basically 3/5 of Miles Davis's first great quintet. Killer. Absolutely essential. This one is another one that no jazz album or no jazz library is complete with. If I came up with a list of like 10 gateway drug albums to get people into jazz, somebody that knows nothing about jazz and wanted some albums to check out, if I were to make a list of 10, this one's definitely on it. Here's an original pressing of Saxophone Colossus, Prestige 7079. This is probably his most sought after Prestige record, either this or Work Time. This is a sax quartet, so it's Sonny on tenor, obviously. Tommy Flanagan on piano, Max Roach on drums, and Doug Watkins on bass. Just a bunch of working class stalwarts, man. These guys were the consummate professionals, and they produced an unbelievable record here. All right, we'll move on to Miles Davis. Miles Davis started putting out albums on Prestige in the early 50s, 10-inch records. This, we'll start in the mid-50s. This is actually the very first album that Miles ever recorded with his first great quintet. It's just called Miles. This is an original pressing, so it's got the entire first great quintet here. It's got Miles on trumpet, John Coltrane on tenor sax, Red Garland on piano, Paul Chambers on bass, Philly Joe Jones on drums. This is just a nice, quiet, moody kind of record. It's a wonderful rainy day record when you can't go outside and you just want to stare out at the window at the rain. God, this is just an unbelievable soundtrack. Awesome. And then, of course, a lot of the albums that Miles Davis is remembered for were the albums that he did for Columbia in the very late 50s and into the 60s. But before he was allowed to go to Columbia, he still owed Prestige 4 albums worth of material. And so over the course of 2 days in 1956, he went into the studio and recorded four albums worth of material to get out of his Prestige contract. And those 4 albums would come out over the next roughly 4 years. And so the first one that came out was Prestige 7094. This is Cooking with the Miles Davis Quintet. So this was, this is, again, the first great quintet, the complete 5. This is probably, if I were going to rank the 4 albums that he did to get out of his contract, I'd probably put this one at number 2. It's great, but there are some better ones. So this one came out in 57, I believe. And then the second one that came out was, let's see. This one, Relaxin' with the Miles Davis Quintet. This is 7129. And this one is probably my favorite of the 4. There's seriously not a bad moment here. It's unbelievable how just good this record makes me feel when I listen to it. I don't know. It's just one of those records that moves me. I love it. Then the third one, this one came out, I believe, in 59, either 59 or 60. I believe 59. This is Working with the Miles Davis Quintet. And I'd probably say that this is tied for third with the fourth record that I'll show in a minute. And then the last one in the series. Last one in the series. This one came out in '61. It's Prestige 7200. This is Steamin' with the Miles Davis Quintet. This is probably the one I listen to the least. Also, this is probably the easiest one of the four to find an original pressing of. It's not that this is bad, just for whatever reason, I just like the other ones better, that's all. All right. Next artist subset we'll go with here with Prestige. Let's go with John Coltrane. So Coltrane's first band leader album ever was released on Prestige. Here's an original pressing of it. This is just aptly titled Coltrane's Prestige 7105. This album is incredible, especially because there's no Coltrane originals. This is all just standards and covers. And I mean, if you can listen to this and not, tap your foot along and get tendonitis in your foot, you're a better man than I. And then this one's cool for two reasons. First off, it's probably Coltrane's best album for Prestige. And also this particular copy I'll get into in a second, but this is called Soul Train. This is 7142. This came out in 1958. This has Coltrane on tenor with Red Garland on piano, Paul Chambers on bass, and Art Taylor on drums. So there's that all-star rhythm section again. So this is just a sax quartet. And this is just so soulful and so bluesy. It's just wonderful. Also, I will say, as you can tell, this copy is really super nice. If there is such a thing as a 60-plus-year-old record that is in near mint condition, this one is probably a contender. It's amazing what nice shape this is in. You can see the stamp over here from Frankie's Birdland in Norfolk, Virginia, which is where this was purchased originally. Then the dope who wrote his name up there. But oddly enough, this came out of a rock collection. A local shop bought a rock collection with about 500 records, and this was the only jazz record in the entire lot. How that ended up in a 500-piece rock collection, who knows? I mean, if you're only going to own one jazz album, I suppose you could do a whole lot worse than Soul Train, but interesting. But either way, I'm glad to have it. So that kind of goes over some of the rarer and cooler Prestige records I own. So now I'm going to talk about New Jazz for a little bit. New Jazz was the label where Prestige put out some stuff that was probably a little left to center, probably wouldn't appeal to as many people. And overall, I think New Jazz stuff was pressed in lesser quantities because they didn't expect it to sell as well. But it was important because it got some different styles of jazz out there and things that would push the boundaries a little bit. And that's not to say that everything on New Jazz was like that, because certainly it wasn't. But there was definitely some pretty vanilla, straight ahead stuff released on New Jazz as well. So I've kind of got the whole gamut here. So this one, we'll start here. This one's absolutely gorgeous. This is bassist Doug Watkins, and this actually features him on a cello. And so this is called Solnik, and it's got Doug Watkins on cello and Yusef Lateef on both flute and oboe. And, jazz flute, not everyone's cup of tea. Jazz oboe, I mean, really? It's fantastic. And then it's got Hugh Lawson on piano, Herman Wright on bass, and Lex Humphreys on drums. The interesting thing about Doug Watkins when he plays the cello on this record is that a lot of times he doesn't play it with a bow. He actually picks it with his fingers, which creates a neat sound. So this is one of those records I'd highly suggest checking out if you want something a little different. All right, next up here is Ken McIntyre. This is called Stone Blues. This is actually a slightly later New Jazz release, and this has Ken McIntyre on alto and flute, along with John Mancebo Lewis on trombone, Dizzy Sal on piano, Paul Morrison on bass, and Bobby Ward on drums. So I should also say this is another thing about new jazz is that it was used to get some lesser known artists some exposure. I didn't know any of these guys when I bought this record, but it surprised me. I was very, very happy with how this sounded. It's very good. I still pull this out pretty regularly and play it. It's awesome. Okay. Next, this one's a darling of the trophy collectors. So Dorothy Ashby and Frank Wess. Dorothy Ashby was one of the only people that I can think of that ever played jazz harp. And she put out a couple of records with Frank Wess, who played flute. And this one is incredibly difficult to find in any condition, never mind good. This one is in kind of rough shape, but it plays okay. So this has Dorothy Ashby on harp, Frank Wess on flute, Herman Wright on bass, and Roy Haynes on drums. Roy Haynes is a legend. And this is probably not everyone's cup of tea. I absolutely love it. But there are a number of people that are just kind of like, because they don't like jazz flute, and harp is a little bit weird. But I don't mind weird. I think it's cool. So this is another one I play pretty regularly. I dig it. And then let's see. Okay, so going back to vibraphones in jazz, Teddy Charles. This one is called Coolin'. This is another darling of the trophy collectors. So this has Teddy Charles on vibes, Idris Solomon on piano, or on trumpet rather, John Jenkins on alto sax, Mal Waldron on piano, Addison Farmer on bass, and Jerry Segal on drums. So this is a good-sized band, and they produce a killer sound on this. This is just like a wall of sound, and it's so good. So interestingly, this next one, Eric Dolphy is always known for being a little left of center. And this one is called Out There. And ironically, this record really isn't too much out there. I would say that if you were getting into Eric Dolphy, this is actually probably a really good one to start with, actually. Dolphy on this plays alto, flute, B-flat, and bass clarinets, both. And then it's got Ron Carter on cello instead of bass, George Duvivier on bass, and then Roy Haynes on drums. So it's got cello and bass, and then Dolphy playing a whole host of things. So this is just a really cool record. It's got a nice sound. It creates a cool atmosphere. If you've never heard this, I would definitely recommend checking it out, especially if you like some of Dolphy's Blue Note stuff, like Out to Lunch and things. This one isn't quite as it's not quite. It doesn't involve quite the investment from the listener that Out to Lunch does. So this is a good one to start with. And then here is an interesting piano trio record. This is Impressions by the Mal Waldron Trio. So this is Mal Waldron on piano, Addison Farmer on bass, and Al Heath on drums. So this is what I mean. Sometimes new jazz just put out some, stuff that would appeal to anybody, right? And, plenty of people like piano trios. And this one is great. So, this is another one in the Prestige catalog. Like if I were going to go through, if I were going to go through and rate, piano trio records that Prestige released in this period, I mean, I'd probably put this top 5, definitely. And then the last one here, this is probably the single most sought after new jazz record by the trophy collectors. And I'm going to preface this by saying that trumpet quartets did not seem very popular with people. And it's really hard to understand why, but so many trumpet quartet records from this time, it doesn't matter who the band leader was, trumpet quartets in general, the records just seem to be really hard to find. People just didn't buy them. I don't know why. but here is probably the best one of all time. This one is absolutely a perfect 10, featuring Kenny Dorham on trumpet, Tommy Flanagan on piano, Paul Chambers on bass, and Art Taylor on drums. This is Quiet Kenny, and this is an absolute perfect name for this record because Kenny Dorham's playing is always, it's never overpowering, which is very easy to do with a powerful instrument like a trumpet. And he just kind of keeps a nice slow burn throughout the entire record. And there's nothing I can complain about on this record. It's literally a perfect 10. There are many reissues. Well, I won't say many reissues, but there are some out there. So I would recommend picking this up if you can find one at a decent price, because again, I would say no jazz library is complete without a copy of this. So that's all I've got, and I just wanted to kind of close by saying that none of these records that I've shown, other than a small handful of them, are really in collector quality condition. A lot of them would be given a VG grade. A very small few of them would probably even get a G+ grade. For me, I'm not as concerned about having a collector quality copy of anything because A, I don't want to pay collector quality prices, but B, I just want a copy to play. As I said in the beginning of the video, I want to hear the same cut that people heard back then. I don't necessarily want to hear it on the equipment that they had back then, but I want to hear that same cut. And so these are play copies for me. They're not, trophies to put on a shelf or to frame or to look at or whatever, right? So I don't care about, bent corners. I don't care about seam splits. I don't care about things like that. I want a copy that displays nicely and plays reasonably well. And, I'm not super picky about surface noise and, a few pops and ticks here and there. I mean, you have to be willing to put up with some of that stuff if you're into old jazz records. I mean, that's just the way it is. Unless you have a bottomless pit of money, you have to be willing to put up with some of that stuff. So, these copies, I love them to death. If I ever get the chance to upgrade any of the ones that I feel need upgrades, I'll certainly do that. But, again, just looking for play copies, and I've got some great ones here. So that's going to do it for today, guys. I'm going to come back hopefully tomorrow with another record label. Plan on doing one of these for Blue Note, Impulse, Riverside, and then another video of just assorted other labels. May do another one on Verve too, as I've got some really good Verve stuff too. So anyway, take it easy, guys, and I'll catch you on the flip side. Peace.